Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 5. Roll that intro.
Hello? Hello, are you in there? This is Grendel, your friendly neighborhood satanic funeral director. I was driving around the block when I heard the flatline. Makes me think you might be in need of my services. Ma'am, I really wish there was more that I could do, but alas, I've never really been much good at necromancy. I know you're going to be facing the hardest and most trying times of your life coming up. While you're thinking about that, please think about one thing for me. Was your husband a mahogany man?
Although I am a member of the Church of Satan, I do not speak for the Church of Satan.
The opinions expressed here are not necessarily the opinions of the creators. If you're offended by anything that you hear, we suggest that you make your way to your nearest sporting goods store, buy a helmet, and secure it firmly. Life is tough, Petunia. Figure it out.
What do we have for you on this installment of Undertaking Satan? You have questions, I have answers. Some of them are serious, some of them are silly. We're going to take a look at all of them right after this.
Hey boss, how's it going?
Where in the sweet hell have you been? I almost had to embalm Mrs. Johnson myself.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I took a long lunch so I could swing by the post office. I had to grab the mail and check the P.O. box.
I don't know why you even bother. Now that I got my monthly nudie magazines going to my place, there's never anything good. Just bills and hate mail.
Yeah, for religions that are supposed to be all about acceptance and love, they sure like to hate folks that are different from them.
Whoa, looks like something that fell off of a homeless mall Santa's sleigh. It's not ticking, is it?
No, it's not ticking.
It seems like a lot of these children of light graduate real fast from Jesus loves you, burn in hell you satanic fuck stationery to Home Depot chemistry. I don't want to have to call the bomb squad again. Smell it. Does it smell like anthrax or dog shit?
You don't pay me enough for that.
Open it up. I've got $20 on glitter bomb.
Okay, fine.
Undertaking Satan presents Grendel's mailbag. We're reaching into the mailbag. We're reaching deep this week. I've got quite a few here. I just want to say that I knew this was going to happen. Anytime you put your email out there, you're going to get a lot of stuff coming in that's interesting. The first one I'd like to talk about is one of those emails that was interesting. Now, this person did not leave their name. I'm pretty sure this is just a throwaway account. Um, they didn't sign it. They didn't say anything. They didn't even give a name. So, but this person claimed to be a funeral director. However, from the spelling, like there were so many spelling errors in this. Maybe it was a language barrier, something of that nature. But there were like, this was probably a good 3-page email if I were to print it off. And there had to be hundreds of errors. If you are a funeral director, how do you write obituaries? Basically, there were two main parts of it. Number one, they were wanted me to know that I'm a terrible person, that I'm going to burn in hell, and that I'm most likely a terrible funeral director. And they also went into this big diatribe on how it's people like me that are ruining the funeral industry. I don't know what that meant, but okay. And then my favorite part was about halfway through this thing, quote, Give me your name and license number so I can report you to the Board of Mortuary Science for moral turpitude and unprofessional behavior. I've looked up your name and you are a liar. You do not have a license number in any state inside of America. Furthermore, Death Hawk Funeral Home does not exist, which means that you are committing fraud. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a parody channel. I don't think I really have to say that out loud. Grendel Death Hawk is a pseudonym. I use a cartoon character to represent him. Also, the people that work for Grendel inside of Grendel's head, um, namely Little Grendel and Lester, are also fictitious cartoons. Really, they're all me. Do we really have to break it down Barney style? And as far as people like me ruining funeral service, they went into some sort of diatribe on it, but really it was so unintelligible. All I could get from it was that funeral directors need to be fine, upstanding people, and they should only be Christians or whatever. I want to let you folks in on a little secret. In my estimation, working at the funeral homes that I've worked in and knowing the people that I know in funeral service, most of them are atheists. A lot of them will pretend, but or at least not deny a religion if it helps their bank account. But most of them do not believe in anything. Now, there are others who do. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that they're 100% atheists. When you get into smaller towns and things like that, funeral directors often, are more religious. But you have to understand that in these bigger cities and things like this, you're dealing with people who are dealing with the worst of humanity all of the time. They deal with death all of the time. It's kind of difficult to believe in a God when you see those things. In a relatively short amount of time, I've seen this industry break people. Either they just can't take it and then they flake out, or if that doesn't happen, then it changes their perspective. Because when you're constantly seeing dead children and murders, and you're in arrangement rooms with families who hate each other, and all of these things, it's really, really difficult to go with the God loves you, everything's fine narrative. Also, directors who are overly religious and stick around oftentimes are in it for other purposes. Like they want to write their own book on the subject, or they want to become a pastor, or they think it's going to get them something. I just want to throw it out there that just because you're a religious person in funeral service does not make you better than someone who is not. Next question, actually, I had two questions, kind of talking about the same thing. But these two people did not want to be identified, but they just had general questions about like some things that are going on in America right now. There's three cases that I'm aware of. They mentioned two of them in their emails, and the third one I'm just adding on because I'm aware of it. So the first one that was mentioned in an email was the Mississippi case, Jackson, Mississippi, to be specific. There's a graveyard behind a prison that was not maintained properly. It was a pauper's grave. They were burying people without identifying them. They were burying people without notifying next of kin. They were burying people improperly, like with no caskets, nothing like that. I'm not saying that that's the improper way to do it. I'm just saying that folks didn't have the chance to select the way that they wanted to be buried, even if they wanted to be buried at all. Yeah, it's a very shady situation. There's a lot of stuff going on. Obviously, it's behind a prison. There's also a police officer that was involved in some sort of hit and run incident with somebody who ended up being in one of the graves. Families are, of course, disturbed and distraught over all of this. They don't know who's in those graves. They're working on it. So that's number one. Number two that was mentioned was a case in Colorado. There were I found conflicting reports. It's anywhere from like 115 to 189 deceased humans that were just found in a storage facility, I believe it was, on funeral home property. Not a good thing. I think the FBI are involved. There's a lot of things going on there as well. But basically, the funeral home owners just decided, hey, we're actually not going to dispose of people. We're just going to stack them in this structure and seal it up and call that good. I'm going to go into my thoughts on this a little bit, but I don't want to pass judgment with prematurely. Obviously, something of that magnitude in either one of those cases is a grossly negligent and stupid situation. And of course, I will say nothing to protect the perpetrators of that. But I am a fan of letting the investigations play out. And then the third one that was not mentioned in an email, also in Colorado, there was uh, I'll loosely call him a gentleman, that was going around and performing cremations and things of that nature. However, people did not get their correct cremated remains back. Went into financial distress, and instead of asking for help or something of that nature, he decided to cremate when he could, and people just got the cremated remains of whoever he happened to have on hand. And then there was a full body left in a funeral coach for, I believe, months. Horrible things going on there. I'm just going to address this in a nutshell with what folks can do, good practices as a family when you are selecting a funeral home, and what you should do to try to minimize risks. It really sucks that during a time of grief and loss, when you're trying to plan a service or the disposition of a loved one, that you have to worry about the person being treated correctly. The proof is in the pudding. There are funeral directors and mortuaries out there that do not, that they just see these people, these deceased people, as pieces of money to be picked up. What can you do? Cremation versus burial is a huge thing in funeral service. Obviously, funeral homes make more money off of burials because more merchandise is sold. Caskets, vaults, thank you cards, memorial folders, renting a space to have a service, all this stuff. So the more you do at a funeral home, obviously, the more that it's going to cost you. They are businesses. Also, times are tough out there. The economy is not awesome, as we all know. So more and more people are going the cremation route, and more people are just choosing to cremate without viewing, just to do a simple cremation. Sometimes you'll get families that call in and they don't want to talk to you. They just want to know what your price is for a direct cremation. That's all they want. That means that I go, I pick the person up from the place of death, I deliver them to the crematory. I file the proper paperwork for the cremation permit and death certificates, and then the cremation is done. There's no viewing of the person, there's nothing. So, one thing that you can do is to try to be as involved as possible with the disposition of your loved one. If you're burying that person, right, you're going to see them in the casket and then you're going to go in procession, generally, doesn't have to be, but most often, to the cemetery. You're going to see that casket either lowered into the ground or placed on the lowering device. And, it's assumed and family can witness if they want, or folks can witness if they want the lowering of the casket. That's the best way to do things just for identification. Also, even if it costs a little more and you're doing a direct cremation, um, ask to view at the funeral, right? Even if it's like one or two people, just like what generally called something like an identification viewing, just to make sure that it's the right person. I know that this can be stressful, but just make sure that they are viewed at the funeral home to make sure that they're that it is the right person. And then with cremation, it does get tricky. I'm aware of a few funeral homes that allow or can facilitate in some way a witnessed cremation. That's where you actually go to the crematory as a family and you uh, witness the person inside of a container being placed into the retort. It's very important in Hindu and Buddhist cultures that this happens. Uh, Family needs to be involved with the cremation for religious purposes. However, it doesn't mean that you have to be Buddhist or Hindu in order to do this. Okay, it can be requested. All right. Other thing is shop around for funeral homes. Just because a funeral home picks up your loved one, they don't have to stay there. You can go to another funeral home. It is illegal for the funeral home to refuse to transfer your person to another funeral home. It's not the same thing as when you go to a mechanic and they can keep your car until you pay them. It's called an artisan lien. Funeral homes cannot do that. So, it's good. You go, let's say that you call a funeral home and they come and take your loved one in. You get into arrangements. You want to do a cremation, but you want to witness it, and they say, sorry, we can't facilitate um, a witness cremation. Ask them and say, hey, who can? And that will probably motivate them to do one of two things. Number one, if they really can't do it, they just have no way to do it. The crematory they work with doesn't allow it, or something of that nature, then they will refer you somewhere else, or they will figure out a way to do it. Even if it's just following the funeral vehicle to the crematory, just to ensure that that person gets there, that will help. About getting the correct cremated remains back. Okay, the thing about cremation is that it is probably the most final of all dispositions. Cremation is also incineration, so it's very hard to DNA test cremated remains. It's very hard to establish who they belong to if the crematory messes up in some way. The last question I had comes from a lady who would like to be identified. Her name is Laurel Humphreys, and she sent me a rather lengthy email just asking about funeral costs. Without giving too much information about her family situation, she sort of brought me through a scenario that had happened with one of her loved ones who had passed away, where she got charged an exorbitant amount of money that was probably well outside of the norm. I already talked about this a little bit when it comes to funeral homes, but it's okay to shop around. In America, every funeral home is required to have what's called a general price list or a GPL. This is required by the Federal Trade Commission. And it's required that the funeral home gives it to you anytime that you ask for it or anytime that you start to talk about finances. Okay? How much things cost. The idea behind this is that you can cross reference the bill that you get with their prices. Now, that doesn't mean that the funeral home has to charge you the exact price, but it cannot go up. What that means is if the funeral home decided to give you a discount, they certainly could, but they cannot charge you more than what is listed on the GPL. If you're in a situation where you know that your person was going to pass away, if you know they are in hospice or something like that, you can call around and gather a bunch of GPLs from your area. How most funeral homes operate is that the majority of their profit comes from the sale of merchandise, specifically caskets. Okay? It's a retail situation. So they buy wholesale from a casket supplier and then they upcharge anywhere from probably 2 to 3 times, 2 to 300% on a casket, and that's how they make their money. All right. It is allowed for you to provide your own casket. Okay. Now, what this means is that you'll have to take over a little bit of the funeral director's job. But there are many websites. I think Costco sells caskets, to tell you the truth. There's a lot of places that you can buy caskets and you don't have to be a funeral director to do so. And then you can have that casket shipped to the funeral home. That is the single biggest thing that will save you the most money. Most of the people that you'll be buying the caskets from online are going to give you closer to wholesale price. All right, so it'll probably save you anywhere from 33 to 50%. Same thing for urns. Okay, urns, there's no requirement for what an urn is. So you can put the cremated remains of your loved ones in anything that you want. Okay. I've seen coffee cans. I've seen cowboy boots. I've seen them put inside of footballs and basketballs. I've seen them put inside of, like, someone's a woodworker. A lot of times they'll make their own urn before they pass away. You can just buy a pretty box from a big box store, uh, no pun intended, and put them in that. I've seen them put inside of birdhouses. Pretty much anything that you can think of, you can put cremated remains inside of. This also goes for other sundry merchandise like cremation jewelry. Funeral homes will do things like sometimes they'll charge you like a filling fee. I've heard of that before, where if you don't buy from them, they're going to charge you some amount of money to put the cremated remains inside of the jewelry for you. Uh, but you can also do that yourself. So the more DIY you get with things, the more you're going to save. If you're going to a cemetery after a service for burial, a lot of times you'll take a funeral coach, right? That's what the casket rides in. However, that's not required if you have a truck, if you have something that is capable of carrying that casket, then you can use it. I've seen semis. I've seen, restored old trucks. I've seen them pulled on trailers behind tractors. I've seen different sorts of things. Also, things like folders, memorial folders or memorial programs. If you have somebody at home that is good with digital design, things like Canva or anything like that. There's a lot of sites online where you can just make it yourself and then send it straight to printing, and then they will print for you, send them back to you. You can also, if go old school and go up to the library and pay 25 cents per page or whatever it is. You can, if you have a printer at home that's reliable and can do a lot of quantity and things like that, you can print at home. You can also bring in your own register book, right? Register books are basically glorified notebooks. If you find like a fancy journal at like a craft store or something like that, something that's more personal to the person, you can certainly bring that in. Those are the big things. Also, cremation is a more cost-effective option. Cemeteries are going to charge you a lesser amount to bury an urn than they're going to charge you to bury an entire casket. Generally, some cemeteries require that urns do have vaults, but a lot of them do not. And cemeteries all have their own rules. Okay, so you have to check that. So those are some tips on how to save money for funerals. Also, talk to your funeral director. Be upfront with them. Um, a lot of funeral homes nowadays are going to complete payment up front, no matter what. If you don't have insurance, if this is an unexpected death, it's difficult. Okay, so talk to your funeral director to see if there's any way to do a payment plan. Talk to them and see what they can do for you. If you would like to have a question submitted to the mailbag, you can go ahead and email me at undertakingsatan@gmail.com. We'll get you in there. That'll do it for me. This is Grendel signing off. We'll see you in the next one.